August 12, 2026. 1747 UTC. Somewhere over the North Atlantic, off the coast of Iceland, the moon slides in front of the sun and holds there for 2 minutes and 18 seconds, 138 seconds of totality, racing east across Iceland, down through Spain, and into the Mediterranean. This is solar Saros 126, number 48 of 72, magnitude 1.0386. It is a total solar eclipse. And if you only remember one thing from this episode, remember this: the moment a sun is eclipsed, the old king dies, and the new sun is born at the exact same degree.
And we don't mean that metaphorically, we mean it operationally. Every astrologer knows eclipses are big. But almost nobody is doing what this episode is about. Treating the eclipse itself as a natal planet. Placing it in the birth chart as if it were a cusp, a fixed point, a 12th body, and then running the entire technical machinery of modern astrology through it. The eclipse becomes a radix. That is the Natal Eclipse Atlas Protocol. Welcome to the Faculty Colloquium. I'm Zara Lindquist.
And I'm Dr. Amara Osei. We spent the week stress testing a 5-page technical atlas built for exactly this work. Whole sign Vedic houses, a sidereal zodiac, an eclipse overlay at 13 degrees 30 minutes of Leo, a transiting biwheel with 22 cross aspects, a 90-degree midpoint dial, and a dispositor map that traces every house lord to its final destination. Today we will argue about it, we will try to falsify it, and then we will actually delineate with it, on a real example chart, degree by degree.
Here is our warning label, up front. Astrology is not a physics department. But it is not a fortune cookie either. Everything we claim today will be falsifiable, or we will say so out loud. We will tell you exactly what would break the model. And at the end, you get a laboratory you can run yourself. No gatekeeping. The sun is being born again. Let's get to work. Faculty Framework, Round 1. Before we debate anything, we need definitions we can both sign. An eclipse radix is not a chart you cast for the eclipse moment alone, although that is a valid technique, and we respect it. An eclipse radix is the operation of overlaying an eclipse point onto an existing natal chart, and then treating that point as a structural member of the chart. It gets aspects, it gets house placement, it gets dispositors, it gets midpoint contacts, and it gets a window of activation. The atlas we are dissecting makes that move explicit. Page 1. The radix wheel. The eclipse sits at 13 degrees 30 minutes of Leo, whole sign house 1. The house of the sun, the house of the self, the house of the king.
And note what the atlas is not doing. It is not using tropical zodiac. It is not using quadrant houses. It is sidereal, whole sign Vedic. That is a deliberate epistemic choice, and it changes the reading. In sidereal terms, the eclipse at 1330 Leo is not floating in the same sign space as the tropical reading of the same moment. Roughly 24 degrees of precession separate the two frames. If you are going to overlay eclipses on natal charts, you must commit to one frame and defend it. The atlas defends the sidereal frame. We will hold it to that standard today.
Second definition, activation window. The atlas is not just a static drawing. An eclipse point activates at the eclipse. But the structure the atlas teaches is that the point keeps operating for the full eclipse family cycle, the Saros. Saros 126 repeats every 18 years and 11 days. So a natal eclipse at 1330 Leo is not an event that happened once. It is a recurring appointment, re-triggered by every subsequent eclipse in the same Saros family, and by every transit, progression, and solar arc that touches the point in between. The natal eclipse is a lighthouse. Transits are the ships.
Third definition, dispositor gravity. This is the part most popular astrology never touches. Page 5 of the atlas is a dispositor map, a directed graph. Every house cusp is linked to its sign lord, and the lord's natal placement becomes the next node. The atlas asks a brutal question: where does the chain terminate? In the example set, the atlas answers, nowhere. Quote, none in this example set, all chains continue. That is a falsifiable claim about a chart. No planet in the example chart rules its own sign, so no chain stops. And that means the eclipse radix inherits a system in permanent motion. Nothing in this chart sits still. That is the single most important structural fact of the entire atlas.
So our framework, in 4 commitments. 1. The eclipse is a natal body, not a weather event. 2. The frame is sidereal, whole sign. 3. Activation runs on Saros time, 18 years and 11 days at a time. 4. The dispositor system never terminates in this example chart, so the eclipse point is embedded in a living web, not a pinned specimen. Amara, before we build on this, attack it. What is the weakest joint in that framework?
The weakest joint is the first commitment, and it's the one everyone loves. Treating the eclipse as a natal body assumes the eclipse degree is a point of stable meaning. But an eclipse is a conjunction of Sun and Moon, and in this example, the eclipse at 1330 Leo is conjunct the natal Mercury at 8 degrees Leo, within a 4.6 degree orb. So what are we even measuring? The eclipse point, or the natal planet it instantly collides with? The atlas says eclipse conjunct Mercury, orb 4.6. I say, that is not a contact, that is a contamination event. The eclipse does not aspect Mercury. The eclipse hijacks Mercury, and if the technique cannot distinguish hijack from aspect, the technique is underspecified. That is the joint I want to break open in the debate rounds. Theory build. We are going to construct the protocol from the atlas, one layer at a time, and I am going to add the rigor that the atlas implies but does not always say out loud. Layer 1. The eclipse point must be measured, not guessed. The atlas fixes it at 13 degrees 30 minutes of Leo, sidereal. That precision matters. An eclipse degree is not a range, it is a coordinate, and in midpoint work, 1 degree of error changes the entire dial. The atlas respects that. Page 4 gives us midpoint structures to 1/100th of a degree. Moon Jupiter equals Mars at 0.10 degrees. Mercury ascendant equals Mars at 0.15. That is the standard. The eclipse point must be treated with the same precision or the whole protocol collapses.
Layer 2. Aspect census. Page 2 of the atlas is the aspect grid, and it is not decorative, it is a census. 12 aspects found within orb in the natal chart. Sun square Rahu, orb 2.3. Sun square Ketu, orb 2.3. Jupiter opposite Rahu, orb 4.8. Jupiter conjunct Ketu, orb 4.8. Notice what the census is doing. It is counting structure, not vibes. 12 aspects. We will hold every claim in this episode to census discipline. If you cannot count it on the grid, you cannot argue with it on the floor.
Layer 3. The eclipse aspects, and here is where I want genius level care. Page 1 lists the eclipse's natal aspects. Trine Jupiter at 1.8, opposition Mars at 2.9, conjunction Mercury at 4.6, trine Ketu at 6.6, trine Moon at 7.8. Now run that through the natal census and watch what appears. The eclipse trines Jupiter, and natal Jupiter is conjunct natal Ketu and opposite natal Rahu. So the eclipse trine to Jupiter is, structurally, a trine to the entire nodal axis. The eclipse opposes Mars, and natal Mars sextiles Jupiter and squares Mercury in the natal grid. So the eclipse's opposition to Mars feeds the eclipse's conjunction to Mercury through a secondary line. The atlas draws dotted gray dispositor lines for exactly this reason. The eclipse is not making 5 aspects. The eclipse is switching on a network of at least 12.
And that is the bridge to page 3, the transiting biwheel. 22 cross aspects between the current sky and the natal chart. Transiting Mars square natal Mars, 0.1. Transiting Jupiter trine natal Saturn, 0.1. Transiting Venus opposite natal Saturn, 0.6. Transiting Sun trine natal Jupiter, 1.5. The atlas is teaching us that the natal eclipse point is a lens. The current sky keeps bending through it. Here is my formal claim. Call it the Lindquist lens theorem. The activation of a natal eclipse is measurable as the count of transiting planets aspecting the eclipse degree, weighted by orb, and the chart only wakes up when that weighted count crosses the natal baseline. I can state it. I can also state what would falsify it. A documented eclipse activation with a below baseline transit count that still produced measurable life events. Show me one, and the theorem dies.
Layer 4, the midpoint dial. Page 4 is Uranian astrology's gift to the protocol. All natal points reduced modulo 90 degrees onto a single dial, so that any 90-degree mod coincidence is a hard aspect coincidence. The tight structures in the example chart are startling. Moon Jupiter equals Mars, 0.10. Moon Saturn equals Sun, 0.85. Venus Ascendant equals Sun, 1.20. Now, and this is the move that justifies the entire atlas, check the eclipse point against the dial. The eclipse at 1330 Leo, modulo 90, lands at 1330 on the dial. And on that dial, the cluster around the 090 axis, the hard aspect sensitive axis, includes the Sun and Mars structures. The eclipse point sits inside the most loaded neighborhood of the entire chart. That is not something the atlas draws. That is something the atlas makes visible. This is why we keep the dial. It is the detector that catches what the aspect grid misses.
Layer 5. Dispositor gravity, and now I will give Amara her due. The atlas's dispositor map shows all chains continuing. No ruler in its own sign, which means the system has no fixed anchor. But watch what that does to the eclipse. The eclipse conjuncts Mercury. Mercury is the lord of house 2, Virgo. Mercury sits in house 1, Leo. So the eclipse is not just in the house of the sun, it is in the same house as the lord of the house of resources, and that lord is disposited by the sun, which sits in house 12. The dispositor chain from the eclipse runs eclipse, to Mercury, to Sun, to house 12, the house of dissolution, of the unseen, of the ancestral deep. The atlas does not say this. The atlas is a map, we are the cartographers. But if you follow the dotted gray lines, the eclipse radix terminates in the 12th house. Every eclipse reading in this chart is, ultimately, a reading about what is hidden. I want to be wrong about that. The debate will tell us.
So the protocol, complete, in 6 steps. 1. Fix the eclipse coordinate in the sidereal frame. 2. Run the natal aspect census. 3. List the eclipse's natal aspects and reproject them through the census network. 4. Measure the transiting biwheel against the eclipse degree. 5. Reduce everything modulo 90 and read the midpoint dial for hard axis contacts. 6. Follow the dispositor chains to their termini, or to their infinite regress. 6 steps. Every step falsifiable. Every step countable. That is the eclipse radix protocol. Now we fight about it.
Debate Round 1. The motion. The eclipse conjunct Mercury in this chart is a genuine, independent astrological structure, not a contaminant. I will argue for the motion. Amara will argue against. Begin. My case. Conjunction is conjunction. 4.6 degrees is inside the atlas's own orb of 8 degrees, so by the atlas's stated rules the contact exists, period. More importantly, a hijack is still a structure. Even if the eclipse floods Mercury's circuits, that flood is itself the meaning. A person with this configuration does not experience Mercury as their own. They experience it as borrowed light, as messages arriving from outside, as speech that feels faded. The contamination is the content. You do not throw away a reading because it is intense. You calibrate to its intensity.
Respectfully, that is the astrology of surrender. You have redefined a measurement problem as a poetic fact. The census discipline we agreed to in Chapter 2 says a structure must be countable. Count this. The eclipse is at 1330, Mercury at 8, 4.6 degrees apart. But Mercury's own midpoint table shows Mercury ascendant equals Mars at 0.15, and Venus-Saturn equals Mercury at 0.90. Mercury is already the densest node in this chart. Adding an eclipse at 4.6 degrees is not adding a signal, it is adding noise to a node that is already saturated. The falsifiable version of my position: if the eclipse-Mercury conjunction were a true independent structure, then removing the eclipse point from the dial would change Mercury's reading. It does not. Mercury's midpoint structure survives the eclipse's removal intact. The eclipse is a passenger, not a pilot.
Counter. You just violated your own protocol, and I am going to catch you on the record. Step 4 of the protocol is the transiting biwheel, the current sky against the natal. The eclipse point is not a natal planet. It is an activated transiting event that becomes a permanent overlay. Its function is not to add a new Mercury. Its function is to time when the natal Mercury speaks. The eclipse is a trigger, not a twin. And triggers do not need to be independent structures, they need to be precise switches. 4.6 degrees is the width of the switch. Remove the trigger from the dial and Mercury still exists. Of course it does. You have not falsified the eclipse radix. You have confirmed that the radix is an overlay, which is the definition we signed in Chapter 2.
Then let us sharpen the claim, because this is where the genius work lives. I concede the trigger model. I will even defend it. An eclipse conjunct a natal planet is one of the most reliable activation signatures in the entire craft. My objection is narrower, and I should have said it cleanly. The atlas lists eclipse conjunct Mercury at orb 4.6 alongside eclipse trine Jupiter at 1.8. In the same table, with the same authority, but a 1.8 degree trine to the benefic of the chart and a 4.6 degree conjunction to a saturated Mercury are not the same class of event. The atlas does not rank them. Any student reading page 1 will treat them as equals. My motion, amended: the atlas must publish an orb hierarchy, tight orbs for structural contacts, wide orbs for trigger contacts, or its aspect table is misleading. That is a falsifiable standard. It can be tested. It should be tested.
Seconded, and I will take the amendment. The motion carries, with the amendment recorded. The eclipse aspect table requires an orb hierarchy separating structural from trigger contacts. Which means, and here is the practical payoff, the eclipse conjunct Mercury at 4.6 is a trigger, while the eclipse trine Jupiter at 1.8 is a structure. Trigger contacts time events. Structure contacts shape identity. If you have an eclipse radix, this single distinction will save you from a decade of misreadings. Round 1 to the protocol. Amara, take us to the lab.
Delineation Lab, Part 1. We are going to read this chart as if the native is in the chair. Remember the frame: sidereal, whole sign, eclipse radix overlay at 1330 Leo in House 1, the Sun's own house. First delineation, the self. The eclipse rises in the first house, in the sign of the Sun, conjunct the Lord of the second house. Translation. The native's identity is repeatedly reforged through crisis. The eclipse is literally the king being reborn in the house of the king, and every rebirth is paid for in resources. This is a chart that asks, what are you willing to lose to become who you actually are? That is not a prediction. That is a delineation, a structured hypothesis about how this psyche organizes experience.
Second delineation, the father and the crown. The eclipse opposes Mars in Aquarius, House 7, from the Sun's house. The opposition is the axis of other people. Mars in Aquarius is the rebel, the collective's warrior. So the eclipse native meets the world through a recurring power struggle. And here is the faculty-grade nuance. Not against the world, but through it. The opposition is not enmity, it is mirror. Every significant other in this chart's story functions as a sparring partner who forces the native's crown back onto their head. The trigger timing. Mars transits across the eclipse degree, and the biwheel shows transiting Mars square natal Mars at 0.1 degree on page 3. That is the switch being thrown. When Mars is on the eclipse degree, expect the mirror to appear.
Third delineation, the trine to Jupiter, and this is the mercy of the chart. Jupiter in Aries, House 9, the house of doctrine, travel, teachers, rules House 5 and House 8 in the whole sign table. The eclipse trine Jupiter at 1.8 degrees is the structural contact we classified in the debate. Meaning, the native's reforgings are protected by a higher-order faith system, study, mentorship, or a teaching lineage, and the 8th house lordship adds the key. The native's rebirths are funded by other people's resources, by inheritances literal and symbolic. The Atlas's own words from page 1, eclipse trine Jupiter, orb 1.8. That is the tightest structural aspect in the eclipse table. Whatever this chart is, its engine is trust in a larger order.
And the dark side of the mercy, because a delineation without the shadow is a horoscope, not astrology. Jupiter conjunct Ketu in Aries, opposite Rahu in Libra, with the eclipse trining the whole nodal axis. The 9th house Jupiter is the guru, but Ketu on Jupiter is the guru who teaches by subtraction, by loss, by the things that are taken so the doctrine can land. The native will be drawn to systems, and every system will eventually burn down. That is the eclipse's contract. The sun dies so the sun is reborn. In practice, expect the native's belief structures, academic, spiritual, institutional, to undergo eclipse cycle demolition roughly every 18 years and 11 days, on the Saros clock, and expect each demolition to be followed by a more honest structure. That is a falsifiable prediction. We date stamp it. We are willing to be wrong. Debate Round 2. The motion. The 90-degree midpoint dial is a valid falsification instrument, not a projective Rorschach. I am arguing against the motion this time. Yes, you heard me. I defend the dial for a living, and I will now prosecute it. The dial's danger is selection bias. Page 4 shows 15 midpoint structures under 1.5 degrees. 15. At that density, some of them will be true by chance. The dial compresses the entire zodiac onto 90 degrees. It quadruples the chance of accidental tightness. Any system that manufactures 15 tight contacts out of one chart has a base rate problem. My own instrument, my own indictment. Without a baseline. How many tight midpoints a random chart produces on average? The dial is astrology's best Rorschach.
And I will defend the dial, because the indictment is real but the remedy is in the atlas. The atlas does not hand you 15 structures and tell you to believe them. It gives you the reading key, quote, points that cluster together on the 90-degree dial or in hard aspect in the 360 chart. The dial compresses 4 copies of the zodiac onto one ring. That is the anti-Rorschach move. The dial is not generating meaning, it is redescribing the aspect census in a tighter coordinate system. Every midpoint structure on page 4 can be re-verified in the 360 chart. Moon Jupiter equals Mars? Check the census. Moon sextile Mars at 4.9. That is the 360 echo of the 0.10 midpoint. The dial is a magnifying glass, not a prophecy engine. And a magnifying glass is falsifiable. It shows you what is already there, in sharper focus.
Then make the dial earn its keep. Here is the experiment I would run, and I dare any faculty to run it with me. Take 1,000 natal charts. Compute the 90-degree dial for each. Record the tightest midpoint structure per chart. Establish the distribution. Then take the eclipse radix charts, natives born within plus or minus 1 degree of an eclipse, and compare. If eclipse charts show a significantly tighter first percentile structure than the baseline, the dial has proven itself as an eclipse detector. If not, the dial stays a laboratory curiosity. That is a testable, falsifiable, genuinely scientific design. And notice, it is not astrology pretending to be physics. It is astrology accepting the burden of evidence. That is the only kind of astrology that deserves the word genius.
I will sign that experiment, and I will add the control you missed. The 0-90 axis is the hard aspect sensitive axis, the atlas says so in its own legend. So the control must include a rotated dial. Shift every point by 45 degrees and rerun the analysis. If the eclipse chart signal survives rotation, it is real structure. If it evaporates, it was an artifact of the coordinate system. That is the difference between a Rorschach and a detector, rotation invariance. One sentence, and it upgrades the entire protocol. This is why we do this. This is what the faculty is for.
Motion carried, with the full experimental protocol recorded in the minutes. 1,000 charts, tightest first percentile metric, eclipse versus baseline, plus the 45-degree rotation control. And for the viewers at home, if you are a researcher, a data scientist, or just a very determined astrologer, this experiment is runnable with open-source ephemeris libraries in a weekend. The protocol is public. The burden is shared. Amara, Second Lab. Make it hurt.
Delineation Lab, Part 2. Now we read the current sky against this eclipse radix, the biwheel layer. Page 3's 22 cross aspects are not random traffic, they cluster. Watch the clustering. Transiting Mars square natal Mars at 0.1. Transiting Sun opposite natal Mars at 3.2. Transiting Venus opposite natal Saturn at 0.6. Transiting Sun trine natal Jupiter at 1.5. The current sky is loading the eclipse's two great axes simultaneously: the Mars axis, action, conflict, other people, and the Jupiter axis, faith, expansion, doctrine. When a biwheel loads both axes of an eclipse radix at once, that is the definition of a live window. The chart is not describing a mood. It is describing a season.
Season 1, the Identity Season. Transiting Sun conjunct natal Mercury in Leo, the eclipse's hijacked planet, with transiting Mars square natal Mars. This is a 6 to 8 week window in which the native's voice, their brand, their first house self-presentation is under direct fire and direct construction at the same time. The Eclipse Trigger Protocol says, when a trigger planet transits the eclipse degree, expect the reboot. Here the transiting Sun crosses 1330 Leo, the eclipse coordinate itself, within this season. The delineation. The native is being asked to speak a new name. If they refuse, the Mars square will supply the conflict anyway. The eclipse always collects its debt. Better to write the speech than to receive the subpoena.
Season 2, the Doctrine Season, and this is where the midpoint net earns its fee. The dial's tightest structure is Moon Jupiter equals Mars at 0.10, the emotional faith axis resolving through the action planet. In the biwheel, transiting Jupiter trines natal Saturn at 0.1 and transiting Mars sextiles natal Saturn at 0.1. Saturn, the lord of House 6 and 7, the house of work and the house of other people. Read it as a net. The native's belief system, Moon Jupiter, is being forced to act, Mars, through a work contract or a partnership contract, Saturn, and the eclipse's Jupiter trine guarantees the outcome is constructive, if the native is honest about which doctrine they actually serve. That is the delineation. The midpoint net is not fortune-telling. It is architecture. It shows you which rooms of the house are load-bearing.
And the closing delineation, the one the whole atlas has been building toward. Follow the dispositor chain from the eclipse one more time. Eclipse at 1330 Leo, conjunct Mercury. Mercury disposited by the Sun. The Sun in House 12, the house of dissolution. The final delineation of this chart is a lifetime theme. The native's truest self is revealed only in what is hidden, sacrificed, or unfinished. The eclipse radix does not predict the future. It predicts the shape of the native's relationship with the future. Every rebirth is preceded by a disappearance. That is the Atlas's gospel, and it is falsifiable. If the native completes an 18-year Saros cycle with no disappearance and rebirth pattern, the reading fails. And we fail with it, honestly. That is the deal. That is the craft.
Synthesis. We have argued, we have labored, we have tried to break the atlas. It survived. Barely. And what survived is a method we can hand to anyone. Here are the 12 rules of the eclipse radix, distilled from everything we did today. Rule 1. Fix the eclipse coordinate in one zodiac frame and defend it, sidereal here. Rule 2. The eclipse is an overlay body, not a weather event. Rule 3. Run the natal aspect census before you read anything. 12 aspects in this chart, counted, not felt. Rule 4. Separate trigger contacts from structural contacts, the orb hierarchy amendment, recorded in round 1. Rule 5. Reproject the eclipse's aspects through the natal network. The trine to Jupiter is a trine to the nodes. Rule 6. Count the transiting biwheel, 22 cross aspects, and load is a season, not a mood.
Rule 7. Reduce everything modulo 90 and read the dial for hard axis clusters. The eclipse sits in the loaded neighborhood of this chart. Rule 8. Follow every dispositor chain to its terminus. And when no chain terminates, that is the reading. A system in permanent motion. Rule 9. Weight the eclipse's house placement by the house of its dispositor, house 1, but the chain ends in house 12. Rule 10. Date stamp your predictions on the Saros clock. Every 18 years and 11 days, the family returns. Rule 11. State your falsification conditions out loud, rotation control, baseline distributions, the below baseline activation test. Rule 12. When the sun dies in the chart, ask what is being born in its place. Because the eclipse radix is never a death sentence. It is a coronation protocol.
And the synthesis behind the synthesis. We did not just read a chart today. We tested a system of thought. The atlas is not a PDF. It is a challenge. Can astrology be precise enough to be falsifiable, structured enough to be taught, and honest enough to name its own failure conditions? Our answer, after 2 debate rounds and 2 labs, yes, provisionally, with amendments. The eclipse radix protocol is now a public method, with a public experimental agenda. Any astrologer, any researcher, any skeptic can run it. And that is the only way a craft earns the word advanced.
One final faculty note, for the record. We know what the skeptics will say. That we built a beautiful machine and pointed it at nothing. They are half right. The machine is beautiful. But the atlas gives us a testable, rotating, baseline-able instrument, and that is more than most of astrology ever offers. The burden is on us now to run the 1000-chart experiment, to publish the distribution, to rotate the dial and see if the signal survives. If it does, this is a genuine discovery about how humans organize meaning. If it does not, we have still advanced the craft, because we will know exactly where the edge is. Either outcome is a win. That is the difference between prophecy and science, the willingness to lose. Today, we were willing.
Solo, and this is the part that is just me, no faculty hat. I grew up in Accra, and my grandmother read the sky the way other people read the newspaper. She would point at a star and tell me the name of the ancestor who lived there. When I later became an astrophysicist, I spent years believing I had to choose the equations or the ancestors. This atlas taught me something I needed at 40 years old: you do not have to choose. The eclipse is a real astronomical event, Saros 126 is real, the physics is real, the corona is real. And the eclipse is also a real human symbol, the king who dies, the sun who is reborn, the light that returns exactly on schedule, every 18 years and 11 days, for 600 years. Both of those things are true. The genius is not in picking one. The genius is in building instruments that honor both. That is what we built today. That is why I do this work.
And mine. I am the daughter of a Finnish mother and a Ghanaian father, and for most of my life I felt like a walking midpoint. 2 charts overlaid on one body, never quite at home in either. So you can imagine what the 90-degree dial did to me the first time I saw it. A tool that says, your 2 points, reduced to 1 circle, are allowed to meet. That is the whole biography. And it is the whole craft. Every eclipse radix is a mixed race chart, the natal chart and the eclipse. 2 families of meaning, overlaid on one native. And the work is not to pick one but to build the midpoint where both are true. This episode is dedicated to every person who has ever felt like an overlay. You are not a contradiction. You are a conjunction. And when the sun is born again in your chart, you get to decide what the new sun is for. Thank you for listening. That closes the colloquium. Before we go, the homework, because faculty always gives homework. 1. Download the Eclipse Atlas if you have not. 2. Cast your own chart in the sidereal frame, whole sign houses. 3. Find the nearest eclipse to your birth date, place it as an overlay, and run the 6-step protocol. 4. Write down one falsifiable prediction, date stamped to the next Saros contact. Put it in a sealed note. Open it in 18 years and 11 days, or sooner, if a transit hits the degree. And when you do, tell us what you found. This is a laboratory with open doors. Next week on the faculty, the sidereal signal, the hidden code of the fixed stars, and the 3 stars in this very chart that change everything. Subscribe so you do not miss the coronation.
And if today's episode moved you, share it with one person who needs to hear that their rebirths are not breakdowns, they are protocol. The faculty thanks you for your attention. I am Dr. Amara Osei. She is Zara Lindquist. The sun is being born again, go be the new sun. Good night and clear skies.